The universe inside of you, can I just
So this video will be split up into 4 parts, which will include the setup, recording, keyframing, creating compositable footage, which includes green screens, world layers, and ZDepth, etc. It'll also include replays and how to use them and all that stuff. So yeah, everything I'm going to talk about and everything I'm going to mention will be in the description, and also I'll include a link to my Discord, so if you want to hit me up or talk about Recording League, be sure to join that. So yeah. So before getting started, I want to mention that there are some things that are not possible or that may cause issues when recording and editing League. This may include inconsistent frame rates. When recording moving cines, this may prove an issue with ZDepth, green screen, and world syncings in post. And there's also an issue with low timescales, so those below the 0.15 speeds in game, it will cause animations, while specific ones to lag, but most cases it can vary for each champion animation. You'll learn this through actually editing and recording League. There's also an issue with MD GPUs having compatibility issues, such as having glitches and bugs with DOF and fog settings. On another note, those of you who are actually experienced with Reshade and that know how to use it, the installation process is similar, but it is pretty buggy to use with the League, but you may want to use that. So what you'll need to edit and record League is editing software, of course, and that will be whatever you choose, such as Sony Vegas, After Effects, whatever. Recording software, this will include Fraps, Shadowplay, Dextory, Bandicam, etc. You'll also need CreatorSuite and League game replays, and I'll teach you how to get those now. So I'm going to begin by teaching you how to install and set up CreatorSuite. So we'll begin by going onto the site itself, and we're going to download and install all the prerequisites and all the essential files for the tool. And we're going to install and download those. And once we have those downloaded and installed, we're going to go and download all the Skybox files from the bottom of the page here. And we're going to put those files into the folder where we plan to have CreatorSuite. So once we have that done, we're going to remember this directory, and we're going to go into our antivirus and firewall, and we're going to make sure to exclude this folder from getting scanned, as antivirus and firewall programs are known to have and cause issues with CreatorSuite and stopping it from working. So you want to make sure you do that, as it's pretty important. So after that, we can finally download the tool itself, and the link will be located right above the Skybox links. So once we get the zip, we're going to put it in the same folder where the Skyboxes are, and we're going to extract the contents. And once you've extracted the contents, we're going to go and run the exe as an admin. So a EULA pop-up will pop up, and then you want to accept this. Obviously I've read that. And it's going to take a wee bit to load up and run for the first time, as it's trying to download some stuff and set things up. So yeah, that's how you get the tool and how to get it started. So now we can move on and set up the game and open up replays. So now we can go into League, and first we're going to go and get a replay. So we're going to get these replays from match history, but there's another method which I'll show later on. So you want to go on to your match history and pick a game that you've recently played. So I've prepared one here. So you want to download this here, and this is how you download replays. And wait till that's downloaded, then you can play it. But before you play a replay, you want to make sure CreatorSuite's open first as an admin like before, and you want to do that. Make sure the current version that you have for League here is the same version that you have for the client or the replay you're opening. So you want to open it, and you want to wait for it to load. So as you can see, the CreatorSuite tool is now looking for a game, and it's now looking for it to start. So once we get into game, all of this red text is going to go green, and that means you've successfully opened and set up the tool. So we're going to wait for that to happen. So now, as you can see, since we're in game, it's going to start going all green, and that just means, what I've said earlier, that's successfully been installed. So now, since the tool is ready to be used, we can now set up our game in League. So you want to begin by going into your video options in game, and you want to make sure your game is on borderless mode, and this just means that you can alt tab between CreatorSuite and the game easily. You also want to enable anti-aliasing, as having rough edges on your footage is not going to look nice. And also toggling character inking, which will be here, is up to personal preference really. So yeah. So now you want to go into interface settings, and what's most important in this section is to make sure you have enemy emotes muted, as emotes in game can actually really mess up your footage. and you also want to make sure you have combat text all disabled, as they can pop up on the actual cinematics and it's not going to look nice at all. But when you have recordings of clips, it's fine, honestly, but it's up to personal preference again. You also may want to disable summoner names, but that's really up to you as well. So yeah, that's basically it for in-game, but interface is really up to preference. So yeah, you can now get started on CreatorSuite settings. So compared to the in-game settings, you don't have to mess with those every single time you want to make recordings. But when it comes to CreatorSuite, every time you open it up, it won't save your settings or any changes you've made, apart from your keybinds. So now you want to go into CreatorSuite, and these are the most important things you're going to have to do every single time you open it up. So in the status tab, you want to make sure you disable announcer, but you want to do this after like 20 seconds when all the pop-up text is gone. You also want to disable mouse outlines, which is this ugly blue or red outline when you scan over any object or champion or whatever. You want to do that. So then in game objects, you want to make sure you have smart shadows on, as having this option off will ruin cinematics, as shadows will look really weird and disorientated. So if I turn this off now and go into third person cinematic view, as you can see, shadows close up are fine most of the time, but shadows such as those in the distance made by turrets will look really weird and they won't work properly. So you can see like the shadow there is being really weird and glitchy. But if you have this option turned on, it'll fix shadows, so objects will actually make shadows properly as they should. So yeah. So another option that's really important when messing with CreatorSuite is injecting the DLL. And so every time you open the game up, you have to do this especially and mess with the miscellaneous, which I'll go over in a second. So make sure to inject the DLL, and then this red text will go green. So, and that means if you know it's worked properly. So after that's done, you can go into miscellaneous. So now we can turn on the settings that we need to turn on. So I'll begin with particle fix, and this basically fixes particles from showing incorrectly. So let's go down here. So you can see in the distance that some fire particles are showing up wrong. So let me show you. So right now they're fixed, but if I zoom in, if I disable particle fix, you can see that they're going in front of the actual tree objects and walls and stuff. But if I turn it on, it'll fix them and they'll not go past the towers and stuff like that. You also want to turn on disable backface culling, tree outline fix, as these will fix basically how textures are being shown and make sure you know they're being shown more correctly, obviously again. As basically since the league is made to be viewed from this angle, basically when you look at them from different angles, textures are actually not fully like done or applied to objects. So that's pretty obvious. So if we go up here, maybe you can see that like for example this rock here, you can see sort of through it, and obviously you can see that a lot more blatantly if I turn off backface culling and tree outline fix. Even though these aren't trees, it'll fix that as well. So yeah, it'll fix textures and all that stuff. So another option that you want on is override culling camera, and this basically means that more is rendered around the camera. So let me go down here and show you. So for example, when I have a high FOV, you can basically see that like a low amount of objects are being rendered around me. So if I, for example, have this to like a higher value, like 120, you can see that objects on the left side of me and right side are being rendered. So basically you want to have like a high value. This maxes out at like 179, I think, yeah. But this just means like your game starts to lag a bit more because obviously you're rendering more around you, but it's not that much of an issue. So this really helps when recording champions that are in the air, as when they're in the air, they're like calculated to be like really high and far away from the camera, even though they're not really supposed to be. That's what I assume anyway. So yeah, you can see here that like some of the objects around me are trying to disappear since I have a lower camera culling value. You can see here if I put on 10, everything starts to disappear. So it's really important to have this on a pretty decently high value. I mean, you can always turn that off, that fixes things, but it also makes your game lag because it maxes it out. And you don't want to have that. You want to have as much FPS as possible when recording. So keep this at like 60 or 80. That's always a good value. So yeah, that's basically it for everything in game and in CreatorSuite. So now we can move on to keybinds. So moving on, we can now mess with the keybinds, and before going on to the CreatorSuite ones, I'm going to talk about some that are default to the game and are part of the spectator mode. So these are the basic ones, which are going to be shown on screen. And this includes P for pause and play, minus and plus to change the speed of the game. So minus obviously go down speed, plus up the speed. There's also F for fog of war. So if I turn it off or on, you can see that changes the visibility of what's seen on the game or in the map. But this only works with the third-person clip gameplay view. Another keybind to note of is QWERT, which will cycle through the red team, so it'll lock or move towards them when you're in this specific gameplay view. But for example, if there's no team members in that side or whatever, it'll only lock onto whatever who's available. And 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, is for the blue team. As you can see, this character's in blue team. So for example, if this character was moving, you'd press 1 and it would lock towards them. So if I put this normal speed, you can see that's currently locked. So this is really helpful when you want to go towards a specific champion or part of the clip. So for example, I was like here looking at something else, and you're like, oh, I want to look at someone else. You double tap that button, or click it once, and you get brought towards them. So yeah, you get locked on towards them. So it's pretty useful. So after going over those basic keybinds, we can now go over the CreatorSuite ones. And basically all of these are up to preference, and these are what I prefer to use. So the ones I have keybinded at the moment are keyframe ones, restore defaults, camera controls, and HUD. And I don't even use half of these keybinds. I only use like a couple of them, but these are what I use. So you can take a screenshot of these, or take note of them, whatever. I'll include a screenshot in the description. So yeah, if you want to copy these or just note what I like to use. But basically you want to make sure that you have the most important ones, which are basically all these that I have shown. You can basically ignore some of them, as long as you are comfortable with using them, that's fine. What's also important is if you do use any numpad keys, you want to make sure that your numlock is actually on, obviously. So yeah, we can now move on to setting up the game and environment. So after getting all that set up, we can now start messing with how the game looks and set up our environment. So basically you want to have all those previously mentioned options turned on, such as disable announcer, disable mouse outlines, smart shadows, and miscellaneous options. And so this is all going to take place in client hook, and basically it's going to be consisting of skybox and depth of field options and stuff. So before we start messing with the skybox itself, you want to make sure you have those skyboxes put into CreatorSuite. So those skyboxes that we downloaded earlier, you want to make sure that you put those into the folder, and this folder is in core plugins, client hook, textures, and as you can see, I've already put them in, but the default one that's included is the Riots SRU something. Oh, skybox, there we go, Jesus. So yeah, so after you've done that, we can go into third person view, first person view, which I've binded to question mark on my keyboard. And obviously when you're starting to mess with all these options, you want to be able to see everything. So disable your HUD if what you've already binded that to, which I have to the right bracket. So yeah, skyboxes, I already have extra ones here that I've got previously from different people and all that, but basically the ones that they've included already by Riot are actually really good, and you should just use those are pretty decent. So as you can see, where's the default one? The default one is here. So this is the one that they use for all their sort of promotional videos most of the time, or when it comes to like the older sort of champion spotlights or whatever. And yeah, I have some other ones here, but that doesn't really matter. So yeah, basically you want to mess with skyboxes more than the actual sky color, because I personally don't like when people mess with the sky color unless you're doing sort of really strong fog in the depth of field. Let me show you. So if actually you create depth of field, and this is really all up to personal preference, my settings aren't going to be the best and it's not going to suit every single thing, but obviously mess with all these settings and get used to it. So I'm going to begin by showing you and messing around with the types of depth of field. So basically the best type I personally think is the bokeh depth of field, or bokeh, whatever you want. You want to make sure that you actually enable it, and you want to do this by enabling it through the full screen option. And as you can see, I've already put some values in, but you want to make sure your character is in focus. And if you want to check like if your character is in focus, you want to click show depth blur mask, and this will basically show like the actual depth of field and like how it's working. So I'm gonna put this value, for example, like, and make sure the whole character is covered in black. So if I have on 200, you know, obviously she's not gonna be in focus. But I've put her on 400. You can see that she's gonna be in focus. So if I go on bokeh, you can see that she's in focus now. And if I want to have like a stronger sort of confusion, you know, circle of confusion for the bokeh, you can put this on like 50. But like that looks, you know, dreadful. I mean, it might look good for anyone, I don't know. But yeah, this is all up to you. So you can put this on 20, which I normally like to have values between 20 to 25. So if I have this on 24, for example, it looks pretty okay. 20, you know, is alright. You can also use Gaussian depth of field, which looks alright. You know, you can mess with that. Honestly, this is all up to you. There's fog settings then, and this is, you know, you pick a color from here or the color wheel. I like just to use the ones that they provided through the color switches. And you know, these are pretty basic, but you know, when you come back and forth and opening CreatorSuite, you know, it's gonna be way easier for you to use these instead of, you know, having to remember what color code you used or whatever. So I like to just, you know, for example, use the lighter ones, for example that, and just mess with it in actual post, mess with the CC. So the types of fog you have are linear, exponential, and exponential squared. And linear, as you can see, is a very sort of basic, sort of tight fog. So for example, I have this like on 400, it's gonna be way closer to the camera. And if I have the far value, well, for example, if it's closer as well, so if I have this on like 500, it's gonna be really like close up and it's gonna look really weird. So if I have this, for example, on 1000 maybe, and then have this on 1, 2, I don't know, whatever, you can see that the fog is really tight and it's really concentrated on this sort of part of the, well, this far from the camera. You can mess with the max opacity of the fog, so you can have it on like, you know, 50% opacity, 20%. Mess with this yourself, you know, see what you like. There's also exponential, which you can mess with the far distance, and this is basically like a really sort of like, this is basically exponential squared, except obviously exponential. Yeah, just mess with it, you know, see what you like. I like to just use exponential because I'm really lazy, but you know, whatever you want. There's also vertical fog, which is the ground fog. So if I can show you here, you can't see it clearly, let me just put a skybox on. So if I have vertical fog on, for example, I pick a color like red, all the ground is going to be covered in red, and it looks pretty cool if you do it for example, your clip recording. So if I turn off fog, so as you can see, sort of the whole ground is covered in one sort of color, which is nice, but I think it's really buggy when you try to use it for cinematic. So if I show you here, you can see if I start to tilt the camera, the fog actually isn't locked to the actual axes, it's locked to like the orientation of the camera sort of. So if I like tilt this like, I don't know, like this much, you can see that all the fog isn't actually where the ground is, but it's more on the actual axes of the camera. So yeah, I personally don't like to use it because I like to sort of tilt my cine sometimes, you know, but you know, it's all up to you. Use that as well if you want. So yeah, basically the vertical values here are just for the vertical fog obviously, and the near and far distance are for the normal fog. So yeah, that's all for depth of field and fog. You know, just mess with those, you know, get used to it. So yeah. So another thing is, when you're making recordings of your clip or your gameplay, you can actually apply vertical fog like I've previously mentioned and mess with that. Or you can actually go into the sky settings and you can mess with the sun location, but it only looks good when you have smart shadows off and you're only in this perspective. So for example, you want really long shadows from specific directions, you can mess with it like this, but it gets buggy to a certain point. It just depends how you use it. But yeah, it looks pretty decent honestly, but I don't use it a lot because I forget. So yeah, just, you know, use that, play around with things, see what you like, see if anything suits. So yeah. So after setting up a league and CreatorSuite, we can begin recording things. So the three types of things that you can record at the moment are gameplay and the clip, which is like your default standard, you know, recording of gameplay and stuff like that. There's also still and moving cinematics, which I'll go over in a second, but basically they revolve around the use of keyframes. So keyframes themselves will store and contain data from your client hooks such as your fog, DOF and skybox settings. And also, it'll store camera data such as your camera position, tilt, FOV, etc. So, by using keyframes, you can create campaths and animate and adjust your, client hook data and camera data dynamically. So, you're probably familiar with this if you've, used any other tools from, FPS games like COD or whatever. So, yeah. But I'm going to begin by showing you how to record one of the easier things, which is the gameplay or the clip. And this basically revolves around you finding what part you want to record of the replay and just, recording it. So all you have to do is basically get the part you want to record and, slow down the game by using the minus key, or you can type it in to the replay speed in CreatorSuite. So for example, I put in 2, you can speed it up. But basically you want as slow as possible. So I put on 0.2, it's like a nice balance of, how slow you can go in the game and to what point the game, won't actually lag in the animations. So you want to do that. And after you slow down your game, you want to hide everything. Or if you want to show health bars, you can hide everything but the health bars. And you can go in and find this by going through the game settings, which will be in the interface somewhere. So yeah, that's basically it. You want to slow down your game, hide the HUD and hide everything, or just show the health bars like I've done here. And yeah, it's up to you. I mean, you can also put on the fog like I previously mentioned before earlier, or apply other things. But yeah, that's basically it. And you can turn on or off the HUD, whatever you want. So yeah, that's basically it. Turn off your HUD, easy. So after going through how to record gameplay and the clip, we can now go and start recording cines. Make sure you have everything set up, like your announcer and all of that, your mouse outlines are disabled and all your smart shadows are turned on, client hook stuff, particle fixes on, all that stuff. So make sure that's all set up. And also see your hotkeys that I've told you to set up. Make sure you remember those, as we're going to be using these a lot through making cines. So for example, adding keyframes, clearing keyframes, activating them, deactivating them. And also your camera controls, these are really important when making cines. So yeah, let's begin by going into first person. Going down to where we want to make cines. So I have Zaya here, let's record some weird ass cine here. Okay, so I'm begin by tilting the camera a wee bit, moving it around. Let's mess with the FOV, let's make it pretty tight here. So, you want to mess with your environment as well. You want to put a skybox in, add some depth of field, add some fog maybe. And yeah, so basically when you make a keyframe, it's going to store where your position is on the map currently and what's happening, and also the keyframe time, which I'll go over in the moving cine part. But basically, you want to have your cine paused, well, your game paused, and we're going to start making keyframes. Remember, keyframes will store all the data and all that. So for example, you make a change in here to like, you want, I don't know, let's put on like 0.4 opacity. And let's have like the circle of confusion to 25 and the focal distance to like maybe, let's see, 500 maybe. Okay, so when we start making keyframes, it's going to store all that data that we just put in, and also the position. So we've put one here and put one here by hitting F7, which I have it binded to, or whatever key you have binded it to. We can see by clicking on the keyframes, it's collected that data and put it in, saved it. So this is how you make cines basically, in a nutshell. You just keep on making keyframes. Let's see, here, easy. So we go through all these, it's all the keyframes we just made. It might be a bit wonky, but it's fine. So if you hit F11, which I have the activate keyframes button, it's going to go through all those keyframes and play through them. So yeah, if you want to slow this whole sort of speed down, you can use replay playback speed. And whatever speed you have the game set to, it's going to play at that speed. So, the speed that we set up earlier, 0.25, it's going to go through that if you set your keyframes at that speed. So, as you can see, it's really slow now compared to earlier, where it was at 1 speed, and now it's on 0.25. So, this is the most ideal thing to do when you're recording cines, is obviously have a low playback speed, as you can speed it up later on in post, and, add velocity, time remap, whatever you want. And basically in here you want to have these settings on, use global tangent clamp, which is going to smooth out your keyframes, and also use playback speed, which is going to slow your game down. So that's basically how to record keyframes and still cines. We can now move on to moving cines now. So after going through how to make still cines, I'm going to go over how to make moving ones, and this is basically the same process as still cines, but you're going to be pausing and unpausing throughout, the play or, replay or whatever to make your keyframes. So, first begin by setting up your game like the usual and, doing the sort of disable launcher stuff, disable art lines, turning on the miscellaneous options, So then you want to go into first person and then go to wherever you want to make your Cine. And then, things to note while you're doing this is to not rotate your camera too much throughout the whole process of making your keyframes, or don't be making too many sort of wide motions, or making keyframes that are way too far apart. You want to sort of keep it like sort of towards your object, or whatever you're focusing on, as you should be following sort of rules of like, I don't know, cinematography and stuff like that to make some good cines. But that's basically it when you make keyframes. So you want to first begin by making your first keyframe, and you want to make sure that your replay speed is on 0.25, so it's a lot easier to make keyframes, because you're going to be slowing this down anyway when you're recording this. So make sure it's on 0.25, make a keyframe, unpause it, and pause it again, and make sure each gap between all the keyframes are sort of similar, as in you don't want the gap between each keyframe time to be like, I don't know, 5 seconds between the first and second, and the next keyframe to be like 10 seconds apart from the next one. You don't want to be doing that. You want to make sure that each gap is like sort of spaced nicely. So let's make another keyframe here and another keyframe here. You want to keep on moving as you want to make your cines interesting, but don't like make too many movements. It's gonna look really disorientating and weird. So let's just do this. I don't know, we're gonna make a really basic one here, so let's just do that. So let's just go back 15 seconds by hitting backspace, and want to look at the map and where our champion is, or whatever's gonna happen, and you want to sort of slow down the game before your champion hits like the first keyframe. So as we can see, she's coming up now. Hide the HUD and activate your keyframes, and before you activate it, you want to make sure that all of these toggle keys are actually on, and so when you actually come to activate it, it'll actually play properly. So I'll show you here now. So we're gonna hit play, activate keyframes, and when she hits this first keyframe, it's gonna go through and play through all of them at the specific speed we set. So we can see that the keyframe played through, and it played through all of them nicely. You can see that my computer was dying there because I'm running different stuff in the background as well. So yeah, that's basically on how to record moving cines. Just you want to keep in mind that you want to hide your HUD before you obviously record. You want to have your replay speed set before you actually set your first keyframe, and you want to hide different elements of the HUD. You want to turn on all those options and make keyframes along the way while you pause and unpause. That's basically it. And also another tip is that when your character is in focus but like near the end she isn't, or whatever champion you have on or something like that, you want to make sure to adaptively change your depth of field, as you can save that sort of data and it'll keyframe and adapt to that. Also, you can make use of fog while making keyframes, as you can always change those values in between and it'll keyframe and adjust to that. So yeah, make sure to keep those in mind. And yeah, let's move on to the next part. So after going through all the basics and how to set up League and CreatorSuite and how to record different types of cinematics, we can now begin to apply this knowledge and make composite layers. So I'm going to first mention that we're going to be recording 3 types of footage, which will be the green screens, ZDepth, and world layers. And you can obviously do this for whatever situation or whatever scene you want. But basically you can only apply this to still cinematics, as well you can apply this to moving ones, but due to League having inconsistent frame rates, which I mentioned previously, champions and other objects and stuff like that will actually move slightly every time, so green screens and different layers won't sync up in post. So you basically just want to do this with still cinematics for the moment, unless there's an update in the future with CreatorSuite and League that will actually allow you to do this. So basically you want to do this in this specific order, as going back and forth to mess with the keyframes is going to be really annoying. So what I find optimal and what you should do is you want to first record a normal version with DOF and fog and everything done, first. Then you want to record a green screen, which is just the champion or whatever object you want to focus on. Then you want to go on to ZDepth, which is just the Cine but all black and white. And then after that you can do the world layer, which you can record by going back in time. So let's begin by going through and making a still Cine with keyframes and a Campath. So we're going to begin by going through and making Campath. So I'm not going to go through all the steps again, but basically you should know by now how to do all this. But if you're getting confused, you can go back and go through the text version of this tutorial, which is linked below, or you can go back in the video. So we're going to begin by making some keyframes, and obviously I've already set up my environment here, you know, with some DOF and some basic stuff in. You know, I might put some fog in, but that's going to be another issue that you're going to have to overcome and go through. But basically, if you do put fog on, you're going to have to change this fog, you know, all the values for the fog later on in the actual keyframe menu, which I'll go through in a wee bit. So yeah, to keep this all simple, I'm going to, you know, not use fog and just go with depth of field. So, you know, let's just make some keyframes, and since it's a still, it's going to be really easy. So, you know, we're going to make a keyframe here, make one here, and obviously you can see the characters in focus. So let's just do that. It's really basic Campath, but you know, it should be fine. You know, activate those two toggles and we should be able to play it. You know, set your replay speed to 0.2 for, you know, slow speed, and, you know, allowing you to remap it or add velocity to it later on. So you want to basically wait till this whole process is over, and then you're going to do it for another type of, you know, recording. So let's just pretend it's, you know, it's finished, it's ended there. We're going to go back and we're going to record either the ZDepth or a green screen. So I'm going to show you how to do your ZDepth first. So there's two types of ZDepth you can make, or, you know, record. There's the show depth blur map, or mask even, and that's basically going to use the values you put in, your focal distance and your focal width. Or you can use the show linear depth, which is basically, you know, the set sort of depth that, you know, League has. And as you can see, everything's basically in focus. If I were to go in and, you know, show my, you know, depth of field in the actual game, I'm using the blur mask, but it's not, you know, going to be using that. This one is like, I prefer not to use this one at all, because it's, you know, really sort of, it's basically everything's in focus, and I want to sort of blur things out in post. But this basically leaves you a bit more, you know, flexibility in post, because you can mess around with this with levels. But I'll go through all of that some other time, because that's basically, you know, another thing to go over. But yeah, I like to use blur mask. And for example, you want to show a bit more of the map behind the champion or object you're focusing on, you can go into client hook data in your keyframes. And basically, to get to this menu, you just double click, or you can just press the, you know, plus icon beside your keyframe, go into client hook data. And as you can see, as I mentioned in, you know, earlier on in the tutorial, or even if you want to read the text version, which is, you know, what I prefer you to actually use, because there's a lot more information in there and it's a lot more concise and, you know, accurate. So basically, in the client hook data, you can see all these values that I mentioned, such as your focal distance, your width, your fog, near and far values, and also your densities and all, which you're gonna have to use for green screens as well. But basically, you want to get familiar with this menu, so it's basically going to be easier for you to make these types of footage. So basically, you want to begin by showing a bit more of the environment. So you want to show, you know, the background and stuff. So as you can see, we can see the focal distance and focal width. If you can remember from back then, that if you show more of the width, you can basically show more of the background, basically, and the distance is like where the foreground is. So basically, it's what's in focus. So if I put this to like 3000. We can see that some of the background, or, you know, the environment's being showed in the back. And if I put this to like 400, it's going to start defocusing the character. So put this to like 1000 maybe. You know, you can see now that the character is not in focus anymore, but the background is, like the, I don't know, the bush there, or like part of the wall. But so basically, you want to focus on something, which is going to be your character, obviously. Put this on 100 maybe, because it's closer to the camera. So yeah, you're basically have to repeat this whole process with messing with the values for each of the keyframes you make. So if you can see here, I have to go into the same part of the menu, client hook, data, focal distance and width. You want to mess this up to, and then put it up to 3000. Focal distance to like maybe 100, so the character is definitely in focus. And the thing is, if you mess up your distances, for example in this one here, it's gonna be like, I don't know, if you have this to like 1000, the character's not gonna be focused in this part of the actual keyframe or the sequence of the keyframes. So when you actually do play it back, if I show you now, you can see that she's in focus throughout, but when we hit to that part in, you know, keyframe number 3, where the focal distance is more than the width, it's gonna defocus her straight away. You can see that she's starting to get defocused, which, you know, it might be what you want, but obviously you know, you want to keep things easy and straightforward for yourself most of the time, so you want to try to avoid this. And as you can see, keyframe number 4, it's going to try to compensate and bring the focal distance back and all that stuff. So as you can see, she's in focus now, but you know, she wasn't earlier. So basically you want to make sure your keyframes are correct before you even record, and make sure to check multiple times. So after you've done, you know, and recorded a blur mask, or, you know, depth mask, or whatever you want to call it, we can move on and make a green screen. This basically means that you turn off your depth of field, and we can basically do that by going into the depth of field menu and turning it off by going and hitting off. So now you want to turn on fog, and this is how you make a green screen. So you want to change the color to, you know, the really bright neon green in the fog menu. As you can see, it's not dense enough and it's not blocking anything out, but it's like, you know, just going over like a normal fog would. But basically there's an option in status, and you want to disable in the environment. So that basically means that a lot more is going to be keyed out. And then you want to go into your fog type and change it to linear. As you can see, it's a lot more accurate, and it's like blocking out a lot more. So then you want to go into keyframes, and basically you want to go to all your, you know, values and change them up to choke out the background or whatever you want to delete basically from your footage. So basically we're gonna have to do this by going into the keyframes and the client hook data menus. So we can do this by going into client hook data, obviously, and instead of messing with the focal distance like earlier for the ZDepth, we have to mess with the fog distances. So for example here, we can see that the near value is 5000 and the fog far value distance is 8000. And you want to make sure that this is like really close to your character. And I like to basically record all my still cines like really close up, or I like to have them in the midground or foreground, but not in actual background, because that's a lot more tricky, because you can't basically make it so the fog is actually in the foreground only and it, you know, shows the background. You can only basically block out everything beyond the foreground. I don't know, it's hard to explain, but basically you want to read the text document if you don't get this at all. So put your near value to like 1000, you know, 100. Maybe put this to like, see, if you put this on 200, you basically want to do your values like, for example here, if your near value is 400, you want to do your far value 100 more after it. And if, you know, some of your character isn't showing, or if it's getting, you know, blocked by the green fog, you want to mess with your values so it does show. So we can see here in keyframe 2, it's actually not blocking out the background. So you basically want to repeat this whole fog distance, you know, value changes process with each keyframe. So we're going to go through and do this now. So, you know, near distance was 400. The far distance should be 500 because you're adding on 100 more. Keyframe 3, we're going to go into fog again. 400, 500, and then the last keyframe here. So basically you can, you know, add as many keyframes as you want, but I like to keep it between 3 and 7 maybe. You don't want to have too little keyframes to work with, because it's gonna be hard for the actual keyframes to sort of work around that. If you get me, like the movement's not gonna be good at all. It's because it has less to work with. And you don't want to have too many, because then you're going to have to work with too many keyframes and it's going to be really difficult. It's basically going to be really time consuming to do. And yeah, that's basically it. So let's mess with this last value. Far distance. There we go. So if I play through this now, it's only going to show the character and champion. That's how you make a green screen, and that's basically it for the character recordings. That's what I like to call it. But after, you know, you've went through all your keyframes and you finish with actual keyframe sort of playback, you can deactivate or stop your recording, and then you want to go and disable your fog, or re-enable your environment, and you want to keep your keyframes, but this time you want to make sure you're still here in the actual game, and you want to go back in time by going to your timeline and showing your HUD and hitting back, and then you want to pause it. And then with your keyframes that you still have, make sure you didn't delete them, or, you know, clear them even, which is really important when you're doing this whole sort of recording of still cines for composites. Basically you want to use the same keyframes and play them back, but as you can see, it's not playing the same playback speed. So we need to change this and go into the status tab and then select 0.2. As you can see, it's going at the same speed, and now we have a world recording. So yeah, that's basically it. If you didn't get that, you might want to go over and read the text document again. I want to put emphasis on this, as I'm not good with going through all of this really concisely. This is a lot of information and I get that, but yeah, basically it. And if you want to make a clear version of the depth map, you can basically do that now. You can turn on your depth map again, and maybe even use the linear depth map, play through keyframes, activate them, record. Easy as that. Or if you want to mess and use a different type of depth map, like the depth blur mask, you can go into keyframes, adjust it to what you want in the keyframe menus. So yeah, that's basically it. So after going through all the basics and how to set up your game, how to record and everything, basically, I'm going to teach you how to use replays and how they work. So first I'm going to show you how to actually download replays, your personal ones, from your account. And you can access these through your profile and match history. And then you can see your most recent games from the last 20 you've played. And yeah, that's basically it. But a note here is, if you're trying to access a replay from the previous patch, it won't be compatible or it won't work, so you want to keep that in mind. Basically, you want to download a replay by hitting the button beside the replay. I'll download it, and after it's downloaded you can play it straight away. And that's basically it for downloading replays. So next on, I'm going to show you how to get these replay files and how to share them. So these are going to be found in your replay folder, which is going to be in your documents by default, League of Legends, replays, and it's going to be in here. And by default you won't have these folders. I've just made these myself, but you can make these. So yeah, these .rofl files or ROFL files are actually the replays themselves, but you can't just double click them and open them. You have to open them through a method which I'll show you now. So to actually open up these files, you have to make a shortcut of the League exe, which is going to be located in your Riot Games folder here, then League of Legends, RADs, Solutions, LoL game client, releases, this random ass number, deploy, and then as you can see here, there's a League exe. You want to right click and create a shortcut. That's what I like to do. And after you have the shortcut for this exe, you want to go and make a folder for whatever version your replay is from. And you can see what version your client is on by looking at the bottom right. So yeah, so as you can see, I have some replays here, and these are from the current patch. So if I were to go into 8.10, which is this patch, you can see I've already made a shortcut, and you can see this replay file I have here. You can just drag and drop it onto the shortcut, and that's how you play external files basically. So yeah, that's basically it for opening replay files that are external and not from the client itself. To note, you can actually rename your replay files to whatever you want them to be. It doesn't have to be that specific, so like EUS, whatever. It can be anything you want as long as you know what it is. You can share these files, send them to people, and upload them to file sharing websites, whatever you want. So you want to keep in mind though, they can only open replays from the current patch, or you can open up previous patch replays by doing this method here, which I'll show you now. So if you have the RAD folders, which I have here, for example, as you can see, I have 8.7 and 8.8, and these are from the previous patches. At the moment we're on 8.10 as of making this, but if you save the RAD before updating, you're making a copy, and if you rename it to RADs, you can actually use it. So for example, I'm on 8.10, but I want to open for example 8.8 replay. I can just rename my current RADs folder from this current patch to like RADC to RADs current version. I'll just say that, and after doing that I can just rename this to RADs, and the game will think that it's the current sort of version. So all I have to do is do that. Do the same thing where you go into solutions, LoL game client, releases, this, and then deploy, and then make a shortcut from the exe again, but this time you want to make a folder in the replays file, which I have, so I can just keep everything organized. And then after doing that, you can drag the shortcut in, get the 8.8 replay and drag it on top, and that's how I like to open and store my previous replays. So yeah, you want to keep in mind though, every time you make a duplicate of a RADs folder, or if you make a backup of the previous patch, this can get really messy. So you want to keep things organized by renaming things and having them like sort of a file system. For example, I like to rename my RADs to the current patch. So yeah, that's basically it for opening outdated replays. So if, for example, you don't actually have the RADs folder that you want to open the replay from, you can get someone to send you the RADs folder, or you can find it online somewhere. It should be online. If it's not, then ask a friend who hasn't updated yet. So yeah, that's basically it. As long as you have the RADs from whatever version you need to open the replay from, you should be fine. As long as you have the replay as well. So that's basically it for everything to do with league recording and setting up the game and all that, CreatorSuite. So if you guys have any questions, hit me up on Discord or join my Discord server link, which will be in the description, and everything I've mentioned in the video I'll have in the description as well. And most importantly, there's a text version of this, so if you want to look back and read over some notes while you try to figure out league for yourself, you can read that. Also, if you want some examples of league edits, I have a playlist linked in the description. So that's basically it. Remember to hit me up, sub or whatever you want. So yeah, hope to see some league edits from you guys. Bye.